Greetings and welcome to the new episode of the T20 Cricket World Cup. We bring you a new episode every day where we talk about the games that took place during the day. We cover the major uh, milestones of the day. We look at the performances and we then take a look at the points table to look at how every team is doing relative to the other teams within the group and what chances they have to be able to make it to the next round. Today was a really important day for this World Cup. The Indian cricket team, they finally arrived. For those of us who've been following this series since it began several couple of weeks ago, and you've heard our initial comments about the Indian team's performance against Pakistan first, where they were beaten comprehensively by 10 wickets, and then against New Zealand, who beat them by 8 wickets. They did not show up. They didn't put up any fight, any courage against these two very strong competitors. So at the point we made a comment that if this Indian team is to get the deck together, to find the courage, the strength to be able to regroup and get back on the into the mold and to start making things happen, they have the capacity to do that. And today it finally happened. The Indian team, the exciting Indian team, has finally arrived. They took on an equally exciting Afghanistan team, and it was not a must-win game for Afghanistan. They still have a pathway to the semi-final, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But it was definitely a must-win game for India, and they destroyed the Afghanistan cricket team. Let's very quickly bring up the scorecard of that game. Look at the Indian scorecard: 210 runs they scored just for the loss of 2 wickets. KL Rahul and Rohit Sharma opened, scoring 69 and 74 runs respectively, putting on 140 for the opening wicket, their fourth century partnership in T20 internationals, scoring at 10 runs and over. In the 15th over, they were at 140. In the last 5 overs, they scored 70 runs. The last 3.5 overs, in fact, went for 67 runs. It was a carnage. And clearly, they came with a mission. As you look at the lineup, Pant came at 1 drop, Hardik Pandya came in at 2 drop, Kohli did not come into bat, Jadeja, they did not come into bat. They expected these four to be able to just hit every ball out of the ground. They hit a total of 10 sixes in their inning, and they clearly were the team to watch. Really exciting games. And when Afghanistan came out to bat, their tragedy is that even though they're a very attacking team and exciting batting strength and the lineup, but they don't stick around in crucial games. That's what happened in the game against Pakistan, and again in the game today. Some of them got good decent starts, but they were not able to sustain that. And by the time Janat came towards the end, it was too late. The required run rate was too far out of their range, and they finally got to 144 for 7, and they lost the game by 66 runs. India got very critical 2 points out of this game. Let's very quickly take a look at the points table. By the virtue of, let's jump to Group 2. By the virtue of this victory, India finally has got points on the board now. They're at 2 points. Afghanistan now have 2 victories and 2 defeats. They've got 4 points on the board. But the most important outcome of this game was not just the fact that India got 2 crucial points, but Afghanistan's net run rate that was plus over 3 runs and over in net run rate. And India was at a negative 1.6. India is now in the positive territory, and Afghanistan dropped substantially to 1.48, which means that the next few games have really opened it up. New Zealand, as expected, beat Scotland today. Even though Scotland did put up a good fight, they finally fell short by 15 runs. But New Zealand has strengthened their position within the group. Now, out of these 6 teams, as you can see here, Pakistan is on top of the group with four games out of all 4 games that they have played. They have a total of 8 points. And this checkmark designates that Pakistan has qualified for the next round. Scotland, this cross mark next to their name, means that they do not have a pathway to make it to the next round. The other teams have some theoretical possibility to make it through, and let's just talk about what the chances are. New Zealand, out of these, has got the clearest path. They've got 2 games remaining. If they have to win both the games against Namibia tomorrow and against Afghanistan, if they win both the games, they'll be on top of the leaderboard with 8 points. No other, and with Pakistan already being there with 8 points, no other team could come and equal them. So these 2 teams will then end up qualifying for the next round. The only difference would be Pakistan's game against Scotland will determine if Pakistan was to win the game and stay at number 1, or if New Zealand could potentially take over if Pakistan was to drop the game against Scotland. So New Zealand has got they control their own destiny, as we keep saying, and they have the easiest path to the next round. Let's look at India. For India to make it to the next round, they clearly have to win both the remaining games. Let's go ahead and do some predictions. Let's award those games to India against Scotland and the last game against Namibia. So if India wins these 2 games, then they would end up with 6 points in this group. Pakistan's game against Scotland will not matter. So let's go ahead and give that game to Pakistan to make things a little cleaner. And New Zealand versus Namibia's game tomorrow, let's give it the expected result, which is let's give this game to New Zealand. Look at the points table now. If this is what happens, then the only game that we have not yet accounted for is New Zealand versus Afghanistan. And the situation without counting that game would be Pakistan on top of the group with 10 points, New Zealand with 6, India with 6, and Afghanistan with 4 points. So if New Zealand wins the game against Afghanistan, as we said earlier, they control their own destiny and they just make it to the next round. It's over for every other team. But if Afghanistan is to win the game against New Zealand, then let's take a look at the points table to see what happens. All 3 of these teams, Afghanistan, New Zealand, and India, would then be equal on the points table with 6 points apiece, and the net run rate would become important, a really important determining factor. Now, New Zealand, in this situation, will have played 2 more games. They'll have won against Namibia, and they'll have lost against Afghanistan. So there could be some potential impact on the net run rate, but with 1 victory and 1 defeat, it might be just about hovering around the same mark. Afghanistan, in this situation, will have won a game against New Zealand, so their net run rate will likely go up just a bit. India sitting at 0.07. Out of these 3 teams right now, at the point of this video's production, India has got the weakest possibility to make it to the next round. But then again, they're a resurgent side. The last game is against Namibia, and if they were to put up a strong fight, it's entirely possible for them to be able to make it and to get ahead of Afghanistan and New Zealand. So the most important factor here in this group would be, this is what the bottom line is. New Zealand versus Afghanistan's game is crucial. If New Zealand wins the game, they are through and it's game over for every other team. But if Afghanistan is to prevail, that would be the last game for Afghanistan in the group. We'll know exactly what the net run rate is for Afghanistan. India then would know exactly what they need to do in the game against Namibia. So this spreadsheet that we're using here to demonstrate for this entire presentation, you're welcome to download this from. We'll provide a link down below in our comment section. Please go ahead and download the spreadsheet. And this will give you not just this play-along capability. You can pick the winners and see how it changes the group table. But the other really nifty tool that we have created here is the net run rate calculator. So going into the last game, India would know exactly with what the current run rate is. They would know what the target run rate is to get ahead of Afghanistan, and they would know whether they bat first or they bat second, what their target would be. All right, let's come back and now talk about Group 1, where things stand on Group 1. There were no games today, so the situation for them still hasn't changed. They're down to the last 4 games. Australia still has 2 games remaining, so they have the clearest path to the top of the leaderboard. If they are to win the remaining 2 games, they would be tied with England with 8 points. If South Africa beats England, they'll also be sharing the top credits with 8 points. Other teams will just be out of contention. So between these 3 teams at that point in time, and let's go ahead and see what it looks like. If let's give the game Afghanistan versus Bangladesh. Let's give that Australia versus Bangladesh. Let's give that game to Australia. Australia versus West Indies. Let's give that game to Australia as well. And the last game, England versus South Africa. Just to make it interesting, in fact, let's hold off on just a moment. Let's just take a look at the board right now. Let's put any winner for the game against New Zealand, against West Indies and Sri Lanka. So before we head into the final game of this group, let's take a look at the group. England and Australia both have 8 points apiece, and South Africa, heading into the last game, would be at 6 points. So clearly, if England is to win the game, it's over for South Africa. England and Australia would be the top 2 teams, and they'll qualify to go into the semifinals. But if South Africa is to somehow prevail in that game against England, then there would be all 3 of these teams will be on top of the leaderboard with sharing the same number of points, 8 points apiece, and then the net run rate would become a factor to decide which team makes it to the next round. England being so far ahead in the net run rate right now, they are really uncatchable, and so it'll boil down to how Australia does in the next couple of games and how South Africa does in the final game. Now, the advantage right now in this particular case lies with South Africa. They have a clear path. They only have 1 game left, and they got to win the game. And they have to win the game with a decent margin. Australia has to win the remaining 2 games, and they have to win them by a substantial margin. Remember, they're at negative 0.63, the net run rate. They were beaten. They were comprehensively by England, and that really hurt their chances. So for them to overcome this, again, it's possible. It's not really impossible, but they have the work cut out for them. Okay, so this is really where things stand on this in this group. The next games are tomorrow on Thursday. We have Australia versus Bangladesh and West Indies versus Sri Lanka. And again, things will become a lot clearer after these 2 games are over. By the way, we have not mentioned Sri Lanka. Do they have a chance to be able to make it? We don't have a strike against their name over here. So let's figure out if Sri Lanka has a chance. What happens to them if they are to win the last game? In fact, this is probably an error, and the strike should go against Sri Lanka, and West Indies does have a pathway to make it to the next round, and this is what it looks like. If West Indies is to win the next 2 games, and if South Africa loses against England, and this is the situation then. England on top of the group with 10 points. South Africa, Australia, and West Indies, they'll all have equal points, 6 points apiece. And then again, the net run rate will become a factor, and the team with the best net run rate will make it to the next round. And there, West Indies has a decent disadvantage given the fact that they were 55 all out against England and they lost comprehensively. They'll come back and haunt. But then again, we'll just see how the next two games go for them. Tomorrow they're playing against Sri Lanka, and they really have to win this game by a huge margin to be able to at least be in contention for the next round. All right. So with this, we come to the end of this episode. Thanks again for joining us. And exciting, the last few games, the home stretch. We're getting into that phase of this World Cup. Let's stay tuned. Let's continue to follow the game. Continue to follow all the exciting developments, and we'll come back and produce another episode of the series tomorrow. If you like the series, if you have any comments and feedback, please feel free to provide us with your feedback below, and we would love to get your comments to get some feedback from you and to find ways on how do we improve this. All right. Thanks again for supporting it, and we'll see you again. Have a nice day.